one, go.
Welcome to the Property Entrepreneurs Network podcast, Never Pay for Property Training. Today, we have with us our appointed representative, and he's an amazing, amazing guy, Jasim Rehman Khazi. He's actually, he does program management and deal analysis. And today, we're going to talk about deal analysis. And this is something that I've observed. I think about 80% of people in property investment and development actually struggle doing deal analysis. And that's why we thought we're going to do this episode of the podcast to share some of the examples that we potentially looked at. And that will give you more clarity towards how you can look at, sort of smaller deals, medium-sized deals, or even larger deals on how you can do analysis yourself. It is actually a very, very simple process. All you need to do is work from the GDV backwards to front, basically, to work out the purchase price of the land or the asset that you're looking to develop. So, Jasim, do tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Hello, guys. It's nice to be here. Thank you for listening to us. I am a civil engineer. I completed my civil engineering about 14 years ago. And post my civil engineering, I have done construction management, and I also have done an MBA in operations management. So leaving that aside, I like numbers. I have been in the construction and real estate industry for the last 12 years. I have operated in India, in Middle East, in Qatar, partly in Australia, and now in UK for the last 2 years. That's what I've been doing. And since my love for numbers has always been the passion, I like analyzing and I like doing project appraisal. That comes very naturally to me.
That's awesome, guys. You can actually find Jasim, either if you want to connect with Jasim, let me know and I can put you through to him, or you can find him on most social media channels as Jasim Rehman Khazi. Am I correct there, Jasim?
Yes, you are, Jack.
Great stuff, guys. So let's just take a few examples that we've prepared for the purpose of this podcast. The first example is a double unit in Greater London. Now, this example actually comes from Wembley, for example, but this can be applied to pretty much most of Greater London.
Exactly.
But these numbers are all approximate, just to give you more clarity on the analysis that you'd look at. Now, this is a double unit, for example, two larger flats, two three-bedroom flats, or it could be two semis. The numbers would be very, very similar to this. The GDV in this case is 1 million. And again, for calculation purposes, we've made it easier to look at £500,000 each of these units, 2 units. So the GDV is 1 million here. Now, you got to start from 25% profit on GDV for you to be able to get funding in the first place. And that's always the case with any deal analysis you do, regardless of the size of the project. Yes, you can play with the profits a little bit up and down, 1%, 2%, 3% up and down, but you can't be any less than anything under 20%, because then you will not get funding for it. So in this case, we are looking at 25% profit margin. So the profit margin in this, the GDV is 1 million, profit margin 25%, that's £250,000 in profits. Cost to build in this case, we're looking at is 350,000. Professional fees, stamp duty, finance cost, and other costs, roughly approximately about 100,000. So 100,000, 250, 350, that makes it 700,000. So that leaves us with a purchase price of about 300,000 with planning. Now, if you were looking at something that's without planning or subject to planning, you need to be looking to pay somewhere in the region of 200,000 and not 300,000, because if you are applying for planning permission, then there's normally an uplift of value with planning, which in this case would be somewhere close to about 100,000. And these are the figures that we've seen multiple, for example, developments across London, and these are almost always approximate figures. I'll repeat it again, always 25% profit margin on any project that you look at. In this case, it's a GDV 1 million, so 250,000 in profits. Delivery time on this can range from between 6 months to 18 months. I don't think it should take any longer. Always make sure that you start selling from day one your units when you agree on paper. So the day you exchange or the day you complete the purchase of the asset, because the longest cycle of any deal is the sales. It's not the build. Normally the build can be done in, if it's an alternative method of construction, it can be done in a day, or 6 or 5 or 6 days or a week. Or if it's normal method of construction, it can be done in 6 months. But if you don't start selling, you are going to take longer, which means that the finance cost will increase, leading to lesser profit margins, guys. So that's one example that I'm sharing here with you. I think the second one, I'm going to let Jasim take over because he's based in Leeds. So his in-depth understanding of up north is slightly better than mine. So would you like to take over from here, Jasim,
Yes,
on
Jack,
the
I
second
would.
one?
But before we move on to the next example that we have for you guys, it's quite important to understand why Jack is stressing so much on the 25% profit as at this stage. At this stage, we are still at a very preliminary stage. We have not gotten into in-depth details. We have not looked into in-depth analysis. Even your actual cost that you will incur is not the quote you get, but is actually when you finish the project is what cost you've incurred. That only at that stage you'll know what actual cost you've incurred in a construction project. There are too many uncertainties, so it's always better to build in a buffer, and your profit at the end of the project will never be 25. It would have come down from 25 to maybe 21 or 20.
I agree with that. In fact, thank you, Jasim, for mentioning that. Always have buffer in pretty much every cost that is put on the spreadsheet, because there is way too many variables that can go wrong. There's way too many things that can potentially cost you more than what you start with. In fact, in almost all cases, it does. So it's always good to take a buffer there. Again, when it comes to costs, either it's the build cost or the professional fees or the stamp duty or finance cost and so on and so forth. Pretty much everything in most cases will cost you a little bit more. In fact, another thing that I'd like to mention here is that when you get planning, there's normally conditions on it. If it is all minor conditions, that's fine, but in some cases there are major conditions, and to discharge those conditions, in many cases it will cost you a bit more than what you would normally expect.
Exactly. And most of the financing institutions like to see the fact that you have built in buffers and you have factored in for uncertainties, you have taken care of the risks, and you have put in costs to mitigate those risks as well. You may incur, may not incur, but that's something which the guys would like to see before they fund your project.
That's true. That's very true. So I guess, would you like to go on the second example there, Jasim?
Yes, I would like to, Jack. Thanks. So now we are looking at a small uh, project with four houses, four semi-detached houses, new build in a posh English town in Greater Manchester. Uh, so even though it is up north in Manchester where your build costs are slightly low, the GDV in this case, in this specific town, is quite high because there's a demand for such semi-detached houses from people who are retiring into a smaller house. So they easily we could achieve a GDV of about 1.2 to 1.3 million for these four houses. On this specific case, since we have this is a live case which we are still going through, the profit was in the region of about 28%. So we are making easily about 450K profit. Remember, guys, up north the construction cost is much lower when you compare to London, but however, factor in the right amount of cost. Here we are getting a construction build cost of about 430K approximately, and all other costs being about 110K. Now, this opportunity, if you're working things backwards, you could pay about 300K for the opportunity with planning. If it was without planning, in Greater Manchester, you would be looking at anywhere around 170 to 180, unlike the 200 we just spoke to you about in London.
So, Jasim, let me ask you this. Obviously, on the above example and this example, there's two different things. But in this example, for example, the build cost is looking at 432K. Could you
Correct.
share us how it's calculated based on the square foot area?
So here in this case, we look at the square foot of each of the buildings. We look at the type of the building that we want and the final deliverable that we want to sell. The final unit, what kind of finishes do we want to give? And based on that, we drew out a schedule of works. We have gone out, taken actual quotes from local builders to find out how much it would cost us, and then it's based on those quotes that we have got. It works out roughly approximately about 975 pound per square meter. That's
Nine.
about
Okay.
that's about 105 or 110 per square foot of construction cost.
Okay, so a good point to make here, Jasim, would be that up north it can be as much as 100, maybe 110, 115 per square
Correct.
foot, while in London you need to be looking at between 130 upwards, 140.
I would
In
start at 145, not
You'd
less than
start at
that.
145.
Yeah.
I've seen it getting done at about 130 as well, Jasim, I would say. But at the same time, depending on where and the spec,
Correct.
something that you'd build in Wembley, for example, you're looking at 150 to 180 per square foot. If you're building in central London, you're looking at sort of 300 plus per square foot, depending on the spec that's required, obviously. And in some cases, I've seen it as high as 500 per square foot in central London. So, guys, it all depends on the location and the spec that you're going to use. Obviously, in this example that Jasim shared with you, because it's up north in Manchester, it can be done with as little as 105 to 115 per square foot.
Correct.
Great stuff, guys. Jasim, would you like to share anything else on this deal, the Manchester one that you just covered?
Yeah, one more thing. And now, when you're doing your while you're doing your due diligence, desktop due diligence to find out what GDV you can achieve, it's always best to go to the site, visit the site, spend like a few hours over there, speak to the local estate agents, preferably face to face. If not, if that's too much difficulty, always speak to them over the phone. Build a relationship with them because they are your marketing partners.
That's true. In fact, in every aspect that needs to be delivered in any deal, you do need to do a lot of due diligence before you sign on the dotted line, because if you get a few bits and pieces of minor things wrong, which you probably will, and everyone does, that's okay, and then that's what the buffer is for. But if you get anything major wrong, I can assure you, you could end up losing money on a development deal, which a lot of people don't consider. And I know personally many developers who've gone down, have gone bankrupt, because they've not done their due diligence. And when they actually, have taken the asset on, they purchase the asset, and then that's when they start to build, and when it gets to a point of selling, they almost start to realize that the cost of building and purchase has become down to more than what the GDV is, because they literally got one of the major due diligence parts wrong. So, guys, every single aspect needs to be considered, and a lot of due diligence needs to be done. The build cost, when you look at it, needs to come from at least 3 builders, if not 5 or 6. If you're speaking with a broker, speak with at least 2 or 3 brokers. Get your cost right. Make sure you speak with a solicitor. Get your stamp duty right. A lot of people don't know what the stamp duty is like, because obviously it's a very gray area. So get every single aspect of your development right, because like I said, if you were to get one major aspect wrong, you could end up losing money on it. And I've seen many developers going bankrupt because they've not done their due diligence right.
Correct.
Okay, guys, we're going to take you to the third example here, which is 8 units in, again, Greater London. We're not talking about Central London. In Central London, the purchase price of the land or the deal could be as much as 50%, sometimes even more. But we are not covering Central London here. We're covering Greater London. So in this case, again, this is a deal in Wembley that we looked at. We actually delivered quite a few aspects of that. This is a 4 million, 8 units, 4 million GDV project. Again, take 25% profit on GDV, which makes it 1 million. Cost to build ranges from sort of 1.2 million above. We're looking at sort of 1.2, 1.3 million in this case. All other costs, you're looking at sort of 500,000 point. Purchase price with planning on this came down to, so let me take you to, so the cost of build was 1.2, all other costs 500,000. So if you look at just the profit, 1 million, the cost of build 1.2, that makes it 2.2, and all other costs at 500,000, that comes to 2.7 million. That leaves us with the purchase price of the asset at 1.3 million with planning. If you were looking at the same without planning, we would normally look to pay between 800,000 to about 1 million, because if you get something without planning and then you can apply for planning, you'd normally get an uplift of between 300 to £500,000 on this. So in this case scenario, you're looking to reduce the profits from GDV, as the time is to deliver is 12. So in this case, for example, the time to deliver is about 12 to 24 months. So the profits on GDV can be reduced a little bit. We've taken 25%, but nothing less than 20% or 21 or 22%, in fact, because then the lenders won't look at your project. But they can be reduced from 25 to 22%. So 3% in this case can be as much as 120, 130,000 pound, guys. These are all approximate figures. Planning uplift is key, guys, when it comes to especially larger developments. I mean, this is a medium-sized development. Either it's a medium-sized development or larger developments. Planning uplift is key. That is one of the most important strategies to play with. If you can find a piece of land that you can either purchase or you can go and do an option agreement and just get planning approved, just the planning gain can be as much as 200, 300,000, £500,000 on 8 units development. Again, all figures in this case are all approximate. We cannot insist enough that you do need to do lots and lots of due diligence before you sign on that dotted line of purchase. Jasim, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I would just like to stress upon a little more upon the due diligence bit. People invariably, we tend to get a little too emotional with a deal and we try and make it work.
Yes, that we see a lot. In fact, if I was looking at 100 deals, I think about 60, 70% of them are trying to make it work rather than actually working. And
Exactly.
that's because people do actually start to get emotional when they start to look at big numbers. There is nothing to be... Yeah, go ahead.
This even happened to me very recently in January. In fact, the next deal I'm going to be talking about is something where I got a little too involved and I wanted to make it work. But then at one point in time, I said, it's at this, take it or leave it. And if not, we don't go forward. I'm happy to stay away right now rather than being lost at a later stage.
Let's jump on it.
Yeah, so this project it was a commercial conversion to be converted into 6 apartments. It was a warehouse building in Leeds, and the GDV in my estimate was about 870k. In the vendor's estimate, it was about 940k. I somehow felt that number was slightly inflated, so I just stuck to my GDV. I worked backwards. If I had to make about 25% profit on that, I'm looking at 220k. And my actual development costs based on 3 different quotes, not one, was about 370k, which includes a good sufficient 10% contingency, and all the other costs, be it my selling, my legals, and all those put together was about roughly 90k. So when you work this backwards, what I actually could pay for the piece of land with planning was 200. If I stretch myself, I could go up to 220, 225.
Okay, and then what happened? And then what happened with this deal?
Amount of profit, whereas the vendor's expectation was higher.
How much was he expecting?
It was over 250. I won't go to the exact figure. It was over 250.
Yeah, so I think in this case, let me again mention this, that a lot of landlords who own these lands or larger units that can be converted, they normally have higher expectations. So when you're actually negotiating, it's always a good idea to get your quotes, get your costs right, and then when you go and negotiate, you've got a powerful tool to work backwards from the GDV with the profit margins, all the contingencies, and all the costs in front to come to the purchase price. Because from that point, it's not just a negotiation tool, but it actually gives the landlord a very clear picture of what the actual value of the asset is. Because a lot of people do think, a lot of landlords unfortunately do think that their land is worth a lot more than what it actually is.
Correct. So at that stage, then the landlord said, if that's the case, if it does not work for you, I will try and make it work for myself, because that is the intention with which I purchased. So I'm not just going to flip it with planning, but I would do it myself. And then my purchase cost was low. So I could possibly make the same amount of profits and go forward. I said, if there's anything I can help you with, happy to help, because I have done some amount of due diligence, happy to pass that on for a fee, or else you can continue on your own. That's how. But we parted well. We didn't have any hard feelings or anything as such. But it's always important. Don't get too emotional with your deal. This deal, I could have got a bit emotional, and I would say I will work at slightly less than 20% profit margins and pay that additional 25K. I'm going to lose a little from my profit. That's fine, but it is not really losing that 25% now, because you don't know what uncertainties will come at the development stage and how much time you're going to take to sell. The market uncertainties, it's very difficult to quantify the risk that the market would pose.
Exactly, because remember, there are risks that are so there are risks that you can actually control, internal risks, and there are external things that you cannot control, like market and uncertainties, and the sales cycle and so on and so forth. So there's a few things that you cannot control. So it's always a good practice to do good due diligence and to make sure that there are contingencies in place in every aspect of the development.
Exactly.
Great stuff, guys. So we're going to move to our next example, which is a larger development. So we're going to look at 100 units in, again, Greater London. Just for the purpose of calculation, to make it easier, we've taken the value of each unit at £500,000, making the GDV at £50 million. Again, we are not considering, remember, when it comes to about 8 to 9 units, the social housing does not kick in. But when you go over 8 or 9 units, the social housing kicks in, which means that in most cases, you would end up between 20 to about 35% of development that would need to go to social housing, which means that there is not a lot of profit margin. In fact, there's no profit margin in that. That is just breaking even on 30 to 35% of your development. But
Just
we are
would like
not.
to add one point over there. Sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt.
No, go ahead.
When you're talking about this 20 to 30% social housing,
Yes.
it is actually the councils tend to split it in two different portions. One
Yes.
portion is socially rented, where it necessarily has to be rented. So the way you can possibly market, one possible option to sell those is to sell it to a housing association.
Yes, that's yeah.
And the housing association will ensure it is rented below market rates. That's one
Yes.
for social housing. The second is always, now what they are doing is called intermediate section. When you
Yes.
look at intermediate, they basically want you to sell the houses on a shared ownership basis.
Yes.
So on this intermediate, you're not, as a developer, you're not actually losing out money, but you're still leaving money in the deal,
Yes.
which you are going to capitalize at a later stage when the final there's market appreciation or capital appreciation on the deal.
That's correct. So in this example, we've actually not considered
Yes,
social housing, just for the purpose of to give you more clarity in terms of being able to do analysis and coming to a the value of the asset that you're going to purchase. So this is just to make it easier and nothing else. Otherwise, it just gets a bit more complicated. So in this case, it's 100 units in Greater London, uh, and each unit value is £500,000. GDV comes to about 50 million. And then if you look at 25% profit margin, it comes to about 12.5 million in this case. Again, you can always look to reduce your profit margin. It's not necessarily recommended, but you do have a margin between 22 to about 25%. There's a 3% profit margin gap that you can always play with, but it's always, like I said, like we said, that it's good to have contingencies and buffers. You can always look at alternative methods of construction, reducing your construction time, and then in some cases, even reducing the cost. Some methods of construction can actually cost you more, but then because it reduces the time, then your finance cost is reduced heavily as well. So that actually pays back for it. Cost to build in this case. So this is actually a live case that I looked at a few months ago. This was actually in Hayes in West London. And the cost to build, we came up to roughly about 15 million. And all other costs, including finance cost, was roughly about 5 to 6 million. And so now, if you look at the total cost, let's say the profit at 12.5 million, cost to build 15 million, that makes it 27.5. And if you look at 5 million other costs, including finance, that comes to 32.5 million. Now you're left with 17.5 million. We could have paid 17.5 million for this piece of asset with planning. But this piece of land was actually there sitting without planning. So it was actually up for, so someone was negotiating this for 11 million. And the agent came back to us and said, you can potentially negotiate this for about 12 million. Without planning, I would have not paid 12 million. I would have, in fact, not looked at anything more than 10 to 11 million. With planning, we could have easily paid, 15 to 17 million there. But then the vendor wasn't prepared to do a subject to planning. Again, this was a live case. So, for example, if you look at something like this, this is, again, just an approximate figures, just to give you more clarity on how a deal can be analyzed. So in this case, we could have taken, without planning at 12 million, but then there was a high risk because there's not even a pre-planning in place. However, the next door had got planning for 300 units, which means that there was high chances of getting planning for this piece of land. At the same time, obviously, it's a risk and reward situation in this case. If we had agreed on taking this without planning and got planning permission, we could have got a planning uplift of about 5 million, if you can see in this. If you agreed on 12 million, and then at the end of it, with after planning, the land could have been worth somewhere close to 17 million. That's a 5 million pound planning uplift in this case. But again, it was a high risk, so we decided not to go for this. But in your case, if you find it as not a high risk, or if you can negotiate based on subject to planning, it's always a good case scenario. And obviously, not to forget to always try and negotiate an option agreement. Jasim, would you like to add anything to this?
Yes, I would just like to speak about a little more due diligence with regards to alternate method of construction.
Yeah, go ahead.
With regard, when you tend to evaluate doing construction with alternate methods, it does definitely sorry.
That's okay.
When you use alternate methods, it does reduce your time and reduce your finance cost. The overall cost might reduce, but remember to do a little more due diligence over here to see if you can raise funding for your project and if your client, the end user or the buyer, can raise mortgage on that or not.
Oh,
Before
yeah,
doing that due diligence, don't jump into an alternate method of construction.
No, of course not. In fact, let me add this on this, that I think lately I've been observing that many developments are being done by alternative methods of construction. In fact, in West London, I've seen about 10, and I'm talking about large developments, sort of 100 units plus, all getting done by alternative methods of construction. And we literally see them within days, all pretty much done. Alternative methods of construction, you need to do a lot of due diligence, making sure that the end user can get a mortgage, like Jasim said, and then making sure that that you can get funding for your own development in the first place with the vendor. Let me add one more thing, guys, here. If you find a development deal which is above 25, 30% plus on GDV, we can potentially get you 100% of the total cost for the development. Either it's a smaller development of million plus. We don't cover million plus for 100% of the total cost, but if it's over a million plus and it's a medium, or either it's a large development, we can potentially look to get you 100% of the total cost of the purchase and 100% total cost of the development. But the profit on the GDV needs to be above sort of 25, 30%. Anything else you'd like to add, Jasim?
Yeah, I would like to add, in terms of one thing which we've not covered in this case, is when you're doing a due diligence, you should look at multiple exit options. The first
multiple exit options.
The first exit option is where you can just sell the units. Second exit option is where you hold on to all the units, rent it out, and refinance the building, so you pull out all your costs.
That's correct. In all cases that we've shared with you here, either you're doing a 1 or 2 unit or a medium 8 unit development, or if you're doing a larger development of 20, 30, 50, 100 units or plus, you always need to consider multiple exit strategies. And at the same time, make sure that you've spoken with your accountant, because every single exit strategy requires a different tax planning.
Exactly.
And otherwise, you could end up paying a lot of tax, reducing your profit in total. So yeah, make sure you do that as well. Anything else you'd like to add here, Jasim?
Nothing else, Jack. I think we are pretty good. And
Good
if
stuff, guys. So if you have any more questions, feel free to send us a message on the propertyentrepreneursnetwork.com website, or any of our social media channels, or you can find me as Jack Dawhra on all social media channels, Jack, Jack, and Dawhra. Send us a message, get in touch to find out how we can help you to grow your portfolio and your power teams, guys. So look after yourself. Thank you, Jasim, for being here and helping us with this.
Pleasure, Jack. Thank you very much. Hope it was a good experience for our listeners.
Yes, I hope so. Everyone has got some clarity on this. Look out for yourself, guys. Have an amazing, amazing day. And we'll see you very, very soon. Take care.
Most
Bye for now.
importantly, stay safe, guys. Stay safe.
Stay safe. Stay safe, guys. Yes. Take care.
Bye bye.
Take care. Take care. Bye.